So hi everybody and welcome to ADAPT's advanced webinar. So this is an opportunity for us to give you an exclusive insight into the ADAPT Phase 2 research program. We have a packed schedule today with our CEO, Professor Vincent Wade, introducing ADAPT's Phase 2 research vision and the team he has built around that to deliver on the vision. Following that, we'll have a panel discussion facilitated by Professor Aphra, Kerr, where you'll hear from the three-strand research leaders discussing in more detail the overall program. And then this will be followed by a short question and answer session. I'll then come back in with an overview of how ADAPT facilitates research collaboration with industry, and we'll close proceedings with a short Q&A thereafter. I should have said before I come back in, of course, Jennifer Edmund will be facilitating a discussion with three of our research leaders in specific areas of research collaboration around the domains of data governance, fintech, and digital health. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Professor Vincent Wade.
Thank you, Declan. Just sharing my screen. Can that be seen clearly?
Yep.
Great, okay. Thank you so much, Declan, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for attending today's vision of the ADAPT Centre going forward for the next 6 years. I'm delighted to meet you all virtually today and to share the motivation and the vision of the Centre coming for the next 6 years. Even before the COVID pandemic, we've been propelled into a digital mediated world for our socializing, for our working, and for our leisure. And now even our decision making is heavily influenced by media or heavily influenced by the AI behind that media. What we want to have a vision of the future is of a balanced society. One in which we can balance the needs of the individual and stakeholders with the potential and possibility of AI-driven digital media technology. We see a future where the technology is proactive, scalable, and integrated in our everyday applications, in our platforms, and in the way we live. But we want them to empower industry and stakeholders in how we engage in this new world, providing the levels of control, the levels of accountability, and the levels of inclusion that is really needed for the future. ADAPT is an ambitious research centre consisting of over 8 universities, from Trinity College Dublin, Dublin City University, Technological University Dublin, Maynooth University, University College Dublin, Athlone Institute, now changed to the Midlands Technical University, with Cork Institute of Technology, now Munster Technological University, and NUI Galway. It's over 80 professors and over 300 researchers across the country, and it's won over 100 million in research funding over the next 6 years. And we see our research focusing on 3 broad areas, but they're totally interlocked. The research around the actual content itself, the content technologies of videos, text, image, speech, VR and AR and extended reality. How we engage with it, everything around digital engagement, everything around robotics, everything around human-computer interaction, and everything around how we govern that technology, everything around data governance, how we can uplift the knowledge from the data and be able to reason about it in new ways and connect it to new knowledge sources so that we can really have control over it. We see this new approach, this new normal of digital transforming our living, as I've said, our working, and the way we do business. And what's interesting is that this digital transformation is happening across so many different sectors. So when we began to look at how it was changing, we were really seeing that where AI is becoming in the way we use the digital technology, in the way we engage with each other, in the way we offer our services, but also in the media itself, being able to extract knowledge from it, transform it across text, image, speech, video, VR, AR. But also looking at how the actual applications might work in digital health, how do we do digital governance and data governance, and how we might look at the financial side of things in terms of managing it. And then when you look at different sectors, you've got the entertainment sector, the media, financial services, healthcare, all of the ICT and telecoms providers, as well as transport. So what we're looking at is totally different vertical sectors, but a lot of similar problems that we're finding in those spaces. And this gives us a real opportunity to leverage the experience of our industry partners, as well as the expertise within the science and universities. That's from the top down. From the bottom up, for those technically minded, want to have a think in terms of, well, what are the expertise in the center? Well, everything around AI, everything around analyzing media from speech, audio, video, text, or whatever. Everything around how we interact with that technology and media. And then how does it actually happen in terms of the way we govern and the way we use it within entities. Things like data governance standards, privacy and ethics, security, autonomy, and so forth. Today, we're talking about launching the program, but we're also talking about co-creating the future. Because it's not just the researchers in the center, of course it's not. It's the partnership with the industry that really gives us an opportunity to change the future. We have the extensive funding and produce value for money for our research. But what we'd like to be able to do is really help the organizations in going into this brave new world, to looking at economic recovery within Ireland, and to look at the innovation ecosystem so that we can support it better. And enhance the competitiveness both of our research, but also of our industry partners in terms of their offerings and their futures. So with these few words, I'd like to introduce the next panel. The next panel is going to introduce the scientific areas of ADAPT. I'll introduce Aphra Kerr, who's a professor from Maynooth University, Professor Owen Conlan from Trinity College, Professor John Kelleher from Technological University Dublin, and Professor Dave Lewis from Trinity College Dublin.
My name is Professor Aphra Kerr. I'm a professor in Maynooth University and also a researcher at the ADAPT Centre. I'm joined here today by three of our professors from ADAPT 2, Professor Owen Conlan from TCD, Professor John Kelleher from TU Dublin, and Professor Dave Lewis, also from TCD. The three professors I'm joined with here today are all strand leaders in ADAPT 2. And what we'd like to do in this session is spend a little bit of time talking through the research in the three strands and really building upon what Vinny has mentioned in the previous sessions. We're going to give some examples of how we collaborate with academics and external partners, and then finish with an overview of a vision for the future that incorporates some of the key work from ADAPT. There'll be an opportunity to ask live questions at the end, but also as you're listening to the video, you might want to add things into the chat that perhaps we can pick up on in the discussion at the end. So perhaps to kick us all off here, I'd like to just ask an opening question where we really have seen in the last year, I think, a really broad discussion around digital transformation more generally, partially driven by COVID, of course, but also a real searching for tools that can improve our work and living lives. We are seeing a need for digital transformation for people, for companies, and for governments. So how in ADAPT 2, from the research in your strand, how do you think we're going to address these emerging challenges and opportunities? And perhaps I'll go to you first, Owen, if you'd like to talk about the research in your strand.
Sure thing, Aphra. It's a very good question. I think the last year has really illustrated significant challenges that we're facing in new modes of activity, be that work, be it engaging with friends. And the research in the strand that I lead, which is entitled Digitally Enhanced Engagement, takes an individual perspective and very much looks at challenges of user modeling. What kind of information is it appropriate to gather about users to develop coherent models of what their activities actually are, what their preferences are, what they want to achieve? And then also looking at, well, when we get this view of a user, what can we do with it? Can we develop out some technologies that ultimately make life easier for us? So ease cognitive load. And this is something we talk about, is that, we feel as we switch from meeting to meeting to meeting that you get bombarded with all of these things. And that's just your kind of your professional life. And what about all the other tasks that you want to try and achieve? Is there anything that the technologies we developed in ADAPT can do to help alleviate some of the difficulties that we're facing? And at the same time, ensure that we don't lose control. If we have technologies that are doing things on our behalf, how do we ensure that we have a balanced level of understanding what they're doing for us, managing and controlling that? And I suppose another key focus then is to find a balance between various different forms of immersion. So immersion in different experiences to ensure that we are appropriately and accurately engaged in those things. So I think some very interesting individual perspectives.
Can you give an example there of what you're talking about? A type of project, Owen?
Yeah, certainly. So one of the areas that we've been focusing on over the last few years, and one that we'll continue to focus on, is looking at incoming notifications as they arrive on a mobile device. And I think we've all found that you get an awful lot of noise there. They come in at the wrong time. They distract you out of what you're doing. Yet some of it might be pertinent or relevant to either your current task or something that you need to be aware of quite soon after you're completing your whatever you're doing at the moment. So having technologies that automatically uplift and understand what's going on there can possibly automatically respond to some of those items, not necessarily in your voice, so not necessarily pretending to be Owen if it's a message coming in for Owen, but to let the sender of that know that this will be actioned in some way, that some process is being kicked off to fulfill whatever that request is. And I think that's a small snapshot into what we can achieve as we expand out this idea of acting automatically on behalf of people.
And just before I move on, I wonder, are there any kind of projects you've been involved in with external partners where you could talk a little bit about working with an external partner on that type of project?
Yeah, so a good example of that very area is working with a large multinational company who had an interest in video processing. And you say, well, what does video processing have to do with incoming notifications? Well, from our perspective, a lot of it has to do with narrative and the story that's emerging across your life in notifications, or across possibly a bit of video entertainment, and trying to synopsize that into a form that is succinct, is appropriate for you and your understanding, because a synopsis of a video for you, for Dave, for me, may differ based on our interests, our background, the things that we would perceive as being important in that, and being able to draw out the meaningful signal out of multimedia content for an individual user is something that's very important. In the same way, you're trying to draw out the meaningful signal from a lot of incoming notifications. Mm-hmm. So for me, I think the key distinguishing aspect of our work is to engage users in that narrative, whether it's a pre-existing one or emerging, and that they're part of that they're in control of that.
Thanks, Owen. I might just move over to John now at this point, and Owen has talked about this individual level. John, I wonder, could you talk a little bit about the work of ADAPT2 in the strand that you're involved in?
Yeah, so I guess the strand that I'm leading and bring the perspective on from here could be characterized as developing and evaluating the underlying algorithms that might feed into the user models that Owen's group is looking at, and then more fundamentally into the broader enterprise and society systems and ecosystems that Dave's looking at. So within that idea, the strand is called digital content transformation, the DCT strand, but primarily we're focused at that algorithmic level, the development and evaluation of them. And the types of tasks that we develop algorithms for are those underpinning content processing tasks, be it natural language processing, information extraction, machine translation, image processing, video processing. And that selection there is quite broad in the terms of the types of media it covers, and that's quite deliberate because we're trying to bring together expertise from all of these different universities in Ireland, all of these academics across all of these media to see what's the synergies that we can identify in that work. Within that, we have shared concerns in the solutions we're developing in terms of how we can support the user, whether that user be an individual or enterprise. And I think that's where we naturally link most directly with the research that Owen was talking about there, because they have that concept of the user model. and they can bring the user into the picture, but we're trying to develop algorithms that can integrate with that research and user modeling, but how we have a slightly more of a focus on the algorithm prior to the user model coming in. And in particular, two kind of fundamental societal challenges, or challenges that we believe both individuals and enterprise face in the modern setting, is on the one hand, information overload. You know, people who are seeking information just get barraged with so much information. So how do they choose what's relevant? But then on the other hand, which is, you know, is digital exclusion. There are people who, you know, we think that we're bringing everybody along and there's so much content out there for everybody. But if you're coming from a group in society that, let's say, speaks, you know, doesn't speak the dominant language in a society, you can be excluded from the content that's available out there. So we're trying to work on both of those sides, the information overload and the complementary side of digital exclusion. So
can you give me an example there, John, of a concrete example of one of those projects, maybe around the language, or that your strand has been working on?
So yeah, so on each of those sides of that coin, if you like. So if I was thinking about information overload, so I know I've been working in the last few months with a number of partners where we're bringing together expertise. And when I say me, it will be in collaboration with other academics, because we bring together this teams of academics who have expertise across a range of areas. So we've worked with a number of partners where we've integrated natural language processing, with information extraction, and with machine translation to develop solutions that help enterprises to manage the volume. For example, one example would be the volume of emails that are coming in. You know, how do you improve the efficiencies of your operations in responding to emails so that you're more responsive to the information requests from your customers? But then on the other side, we're also looking at taking user-generated content from the web and trying to find out what signals there are there. Again, it can integrate those three different patterns of, you know, information extraction, natural language processing, and machine translation, often with, and I think one of the key strengths we have as well is bringing in really experienced data engineers to support the research academics, so we can put together a solid data pipeline so that the solutions are, you know, that they scale well. Again, that's dealing with helping enterprise and individuals just to filter through all of the information that they're receiving to find out what's relevant. And then on the other side, if we think about the digital exclusion, I know we're doing a lot of work on, for example, the Irish language and supporting the Irish language. And that's done through machine translation and developing digital solutions and digital resources to support the Irish language through that. But even beyond that, we also did research where, for example, we're developing domain-specific machine translation systems. So, for example, one of the challenges around machine translation is how do you deal with specific terminology? You might have a system that can, you know, do a very good job of translating from French to English. They're both, by the way, I use those examples because they both be languages that would have a lot of digital resources, a lot of data around them, you know. But there's challenges if they're, and that's in a general context. But challenges arise where you're dealing with machine translation, where maybe you're going to a language for which there isn't much digital content, you know, or where there's a specific terminology. So some of the research we did recently on developing systems to translate public health advice. The reason I highlight public health advice is the specific terminology around COVID-19. How do you translate that? And public health advice, for example, in Ireland, for populations, subpopulations within Ireland who don't speak English, you know, and how can we, in a rapid manner, develop systems that can include those people and provide those people with up-to-date public health advice that's accurate in a timely manner, you know, so that they don't get excluded or marginalized within the discussions and within the care that the societies develop.
I think that's a good point, maybe to move on to Dave as we start to think maybe about the third strand of research. And Dave, maybe you'd like to introduce that to us.
Hi, thanks, Aphra. Yeah, so I'm involved in a strand called transparent digital governance, and we're interested in the concerns in the similar sort of technological domains, obviously, that you've heard from Owen and John, but focusing specifically on the role of the enterprises that are engaged in adopting, rolling out these technologies, and their interaction with some broader societal concerns. So that involves, both understanding how the expectations for how these technologies work once they're released into the market or brought into service, how those public expectations can be captured and conveyed to enterprises. But also enterprises are interested in this, obviously, because they're one of the biggest challenges they face is building public trust in a lot of the technologies they use, especially technologies that are heavily based on the collection and processing of personal data. So, in looking at this, we take a multidisciplinary approach. So we collaborate not only with computer scientists, but also legal scholars and ethicists, social scientists. And we also take a very sort of data focused point of view, because a lot of the technologies that we're looking at across ADAPT are data-driven forms of artificial intelligence primarily, and therefore focusing on how we govern the data. So how do we ensure that it's good quality? Is it correct? Is it covering the right sort of population? But also, are we addressing that with appropriate attention to ethics? So again, reflecting the expectations society has on how organizations manage that data and implement it in technology. Looking at the legal aspects of this, we're in a very interesting period. We've all become very used to the implications of the General Data Protection Regulation, which has been enforced for a couple of years now, but there's a whole raft of other regulations coming through related to data governance, related to AI, related to different aspects of the digital market in Europe that are going to start imposing themselves on our lives also, and companies and organizations of all types are interested in how they adapt their data governance processes to that, including issues around understanding the value of the data that they're holding, understanding the risks and liabilities they have by collecting and manipulating that data.
This strand has somewhat expanded, shall we say, from ADAPT 1. There's a lot of elements that are new, so you may not have quite as many use cases, Dave. But I wonder, would you point to something that our audience here might be particularly interested in that you're working on, or that gives a good concrete example?
Yeah, well, one domain that I think has been very rich in terms of research use cases, the health domain. So we working with some colleagues who are both medical researchers, but also other computer scientists who've been working for a long time in the areas of electronic patient health records, and that throws up a lot of recurring challenges, because we tend to be dealing with very sensitive personal data that we're collecting, people's health information, but also trying to undertake either research or possibly product development that can leverage that data but use it in a way that's very much holding the public trust at its center. Okay, so one example there is work that we've collaborated on in studying vasculitis, which is a sort of a chronic condition that causes, to do with one's immune system and kidneys, and it can sort of flare up in quite unpredictable ways. So we've been looking at ways that we can collect the right data together, so we can actually try and analyze and build correlations between different factors in people's lives. So that's their medical records, but also, there may be environmental or pollution aspects to this. So, we correlate that with location information, with weather and pollution information that we can obtain from public sources, and also self-reported information as well. So, in this case, we have an app that people can, record how they're feeling. And these sort of applications obviously have appeared in front of us through COVID as well, where we have the COVID app, which asks, both as a way of tracking how we, our status in terms of whether we're well or not, who we've been close to, but also how we're feeling at any one time, what our symptoms are. And this actually gets more complicated now as we're looking to perhaps travel and use some of this information with our COVID passports also.
So if I was to, so thank you everyone. I think that's a nice overview of the three strands. I'd like us now to kind of think about the fact that, of course, ADAPT 2 will run for 6 years. It has a nice long time frame. We're already starting to think about what comes beyond that, what goes on beyond that. And I think we have a clear vision in ADAPT of a kind of human-centric, AI-supported future, rather, and looking at how we can support people. But there's a range of opportunities now, I think, for our audience here to engage and collaborate and help us to share our agenda, to come to talk to us about things they're interested in working on, and for members of the centre to talk to them about that. I wonder if I could go to you, Owen, to talk a little bit about this vision we have in ADAPT 2 and the possibilities for our partners and our audience to maybe engage with us.
Yeah, certainly. So when I think about ADAPT, I think about our tagline, actually, simply, and you can kind of see it above our shoulders here: engaging content, engaging people. And of course, there are nice little ambiguities in that. And if we project forward for the next 6, 7, 10 years, I think there's very significant change coming, and ADAPT is helping to drive that change. So let's think about what some of those aspects might be. For me, one of the most significant things that's coming down the line is trying to mitigate all of the small, tedious, intensive tasks that we perform that just suck time out of our day, whether that's our personal life or our professional life. So think about the amount of time we spend searching for information, the amount of time we spend filtering it, trying to make sense of it, and piece together stories that maybe have been pieced together by others or maybe haven't. What technologies can help with that? So I think there's a proactive opportunity to anticipate our needs and draw in all of that information that may be of use to us, but then place a narrative across it. So it's a word I've used before, so that it's something that is easier for us to understand, absorb, and process. And for me, that's very much requires an understanding of the human, what our tasks, our trajectories, our goals, our needs are, and bring that in. And for me, that's the first step, because that's still something that's quite similar to what we try to achieve with a lot of personalization and have been doing for the last 20 years, where we focus on the person, where we're delivering to this thread of consciousness, our ability to understand information and absorb it. But what happens when we get a good enough model of the user that we can start doing things on their behalf? And I hinted at this earlier. So what happens if we can automatically respond to some of those notifications? And let's push that forward. Let's push that into a more extreme situation. So let's project out 10 years' time. And let's decide that in 10 years' time, I'm very busy, which isn't much of a change, right? But like many of us here, there might be too busy. There are too many things for you to attend to. Can you take a proactive agent that has a sufficiently deep understanding of you and ask that agent to do increasingly complex things? What would happen if we had an agent that could attend a Zoom meeting on our behalf, that would have a sufficient base of knowledge to be able to represent some of our baseline interests, would be drawing in information from that meeting, using that same kind of idea earlier of succinctly summarizing it for our needs later on. And it may be able to offer certain responses in that context. And what are the fidelity challenges there? So the fidelity of representation, maybe of the visual, of the voice, of the gestures. These are all aspects of immersion that, by projecting to that slightly extreme situation, you start to look at a whole suite of other things that these proactive agents could do on our behalf. And I very much see the future as being multi-threaded, that we are no longer the sole actor. And I mean that specifically that word act, that we can have these agents act on our behalf. But of course, that leads to challenges around control, management, agency. What does it mean if you're a human interacting with one of these agents that somebody else has sent? And this is, I think, quite visionary. I think it's often quite challenging, and it's challenging on multiple perspectives. From the algorithmic, of course, from the societal, the ethical. And I think it offers a really interesting landscape to explore the extent to which these agents may function.
So that's a challenging as well as exciting vision for the future. I wonder if John and Dave, if there's anything you'd like to point to there, because obviously when it comes to AI, it also raises other questions for us. And John, you've mentioned kind of exclusion and inclusion, and Dave, you've kind of mentioned the responsibilities and the kind of legal and other areas. So John and Dave, is there anything you'd like to add to the kind of future vision that Owen has laid out for us?
Well, one of the things I'm very excited about in the vision, so apart from the three kind of pillar strands we've been talking about here, that, you know, the algorithmic level that I'm kind of speaking for today, Owen speaking for the user-centric, and then the user modeling, and Dave for the enterprise and society, we have these cross-cutting strands of research that goes across these three, you know, themes. And one of those is attentive AI that I'm very excited about, which is, it picks up on what Owen was talking about there in terms of notifications, but it's that idea of developing systems that are capable of understanding the context that you're acting in, or that they are acting in as well. So a sense of self-reflexivity within the systems, so that they understand that they're able to recognize what is relevant to attend to, and in that way, in that context, and that way minimize the amount of data they use. So so that attentive AI, big picture, could be understood as AI that minimizes its data use and minimizes its footprint. And I think that's exciting from a number of perspectives. One is from a privacy perspective, you know, individual privacy. But another area that I'm very excited about is the idea of reducing the carbon footprint associated with artificial intelligence and data-driven systems. That's a growing problem. So sustainable AI, and that's both, and I think that attentive AI, that idea of minimizing the amount of data, making our models smaller, smarter in a sense, feeds into that longer term picture, both of AI for sustainability, but before we can use AI to improve sustainability, we also have to improve the sustainability of AI. So that's making the model smaller and less data hungry. So that's one area I'd be very excited about pushing forward.
That seems to be crucial in the current agenda, national and European levels. Dave, have you anything to add here to the vision part?
Yeah, certainly, because I think what's really interesting is, you know, as with a lot of our technologies, you know, we're focusing on the benefits often to the individual, you know, making our life in our digital world easier and more productive. But obviously that involves collecting more and more data about us as individuals. And I think, you know, people in general are understanding, you know, more of the risks, or more that there are risks there, but perhaps not understanding what those risks are. And we're asked on a daily basis to make decisions about that when we sort of press these little consent boxes on cookies, and you can argue we're actually not very well equipped to make those decisions at all. And we can see more regulation coming down the pipeline that may put similar pressures on individuals. And I think there's a really rich opportunity here for both, you know, organizations and enterprises to collaborate with, you know, their users in more of a collective way. So, you know, finding fora by which you can explore some of these issues and try and be a bit more agile in how you understand what the expectations of your users are, and have that as a you know, a reliable part of your engagement with organizations, that users can come together, debate this and debate some of these issues and perhaps provide some guidelines. Because I think there's many things that perhaps don't, you know, do some big harm to us individually or in a way that we can detect or are understandable. But when we look at it collectively, we perhaps have a better understanding of what that harm is and what we could do about that. And I think this is especially important, not just from a societal point of view in terms of, you know, people having a bit more of a say over how these technologies are developed, but also companies. You know, companies are being regulated more. They're going to see more regulation, and you know, their engagement in that is driven by the fact that hopefully that will help build trust between them and their users. Whereas if it's not done well, if it's not done with the right voices and debate, in the right places. They can still be subject to regulation and still not be trusted by their users. So we have to find the sort of the sweet spot, the win-win situation in these circumstances.
So just as we move to the last couple of minutes now, I wonder if I could ask you all if you have a final thought or to wrap up and kind of lead us into the next sessions and discussions. Owen, I'll start with you again. Is there just one kind of final example or thought you'd like to offer?
Yeah, I think the thought I'd like to offer is I think we're seeing a transformation in how users understand their data, what's being gathered about them, and also their rights and opportunities around that. And I'm not speaking so much from a regulatory perspective, which Dave would focus on. I'm thinking much more in the side of, well, the model minimization. So to reduce, as John was saying, this attentive side, and reduce the amount of data that's being gathered, but also offering users opportunities around their own data and for them to curate it, change it, say, actually, you've modeled this incorrectly because you're only getting a partial view of me. I think we're starting to see that growing understanding from users that if they can interact with some of what happens under the hoods, and they can scrutinize what happens in some of our systems, that small tweaks and controls can lead to a much better experience for them. So for me, I think we're seeing this change that people don't want to be just passengers in our services that we offer them. They want to have a little bit more active control. And of course, we need to figure out how to do that in such a way that we don't overload them.
Thanks. John.
Yeah, I pick up on that theme as well. So on the one side where I was talking earlier about the attentive AI and the minimizing the systems, we have this other aspect of drivable AI for the users in control. And that for us when we're designing algorithms, trying to make an algorithm that is adjustable by a user and its outputs are adjustable by a user, I think is really exciting. So I know we're doing some work at the moment, for example, and a lot of my examples earlier might have focused on the analysis of content, but we also have a lot of work that works at the generation of content, and the transformation of content. So to try and balance that out, for example, we have work ongoing on image captioning and video captioning, but any particular image, there's multiple different types of captions you could have for that image, depending on the user's context and their user needs. So in that theme of trying to make it drivable and tailoring it, we're developing algorithms where people can put their inputs into, okay, I want a caption for this image, but I want this type of caption or that type of caption. And that's a first step down that line where the user has explicit control of the system, where they're driving the AI rather than the AI driving them. So that will be the other area I'd like to highlight towards the end. Yeah.
Thank you. And Dave, just final thoughts maybe from you?
I think it's interesting, again, to sort of, reflect on this. I wouldn't even say it's a wave, it's more like a tsunami of regulations that's coming down the road to us. And I think with a fair degree more complexity, not in the sort of regulation by itself, but its interaction with other regulations. So the new AI regulation is very much taking a health and safety and risk management approach, and it refers both on the one hand to lots of other regulations that are already out there, but it also has a big dependency on international standards. Now, we've been very active in international standards around trustworthy AI, but again, also have a very acute view of the level of detail they do give you and the level of detail that they don't give you. So I think there's a lot of work to go on there, and that does need a really active collaboration between sort of government, citizen representation, researchers, and companies who are going to be, at the end of the day, implementing these technologies and implementing the regulations as well.
Well, thank you. I think that's been a really nice overview of the three different strands. So thank you for sharing your insights and really looking into what we're looking at in ADAPT 2 for the next few years and even down the road. Now, we're going to take some questions after this session, as you know, and I'll just invite the audience to put their questions into the Q&A section below. And I'd like to thank you all for your time. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Aphra. That was a really interesting discussion. As Aphra said, please put your questions into the chat box. We have some questions already and we'll come to them in a moment. Just to kind of recap on some of the points there, Owen, I like the idea of having an agent that takes away and mitigates small, tedious tasks. I thought that was a good one. I was a little bit more concerned about the future as a multi-threaded agents that are acting on our behalf. So that's a little bit worrying, but it's encouraging that ADAPT are focusing on this as a big research topic. John's point around control and drivable AI and intelligence or minimizing data, minimizing artificial intelligence agents, minimizing algorithmic models, lowering their data need. Again, a great concept in terms of making them smarter and more sustainable, both for privacy and for the climate, obviously. And Dave's point there kind of resonated with me as well about the importance of understanding user expectations to help inform the guidelines around AI and its application, hearing those voices and encouraging that debate. So it kind of reminded me of basic concepts of user testing from software engineering, many years ago, or co-design. And it also aligns with some of our activities around education and public engagement in ADAPT, actually having forums where patients and advocates can meet and discuss topics like this. And Dave's final point was a little bit worrying around the tsunami of regulation that's coming. We'll hear a little bit later actually from Ray Walsh. He'll be talking about some of our active industry collaboration work around data governance. So hopefully that will mitigate some of my kind of concerns from this talk. So in terms of some questions, Owen, how far away are we from a functioning proactive agent that can do these tedious tasks on our behalf?
Thanks for the question, Declan. I think that's a very good question. I mean, I think with this vision of the proactive agent, there is a sliding scale. So already in our email clients, we're seeing automated suggestions on parts of responses. And we're starting to see, our email clients picking up on, invitations to meetings, or if you've booked a flight. So you're starting to see some small degrees of automation coming in there. But for me, the challenge is we have very little control over any of those. And they're all very piecemeal, very small in their implementation. So I think in terms of how far are we from some basic proactive agents, I think we're kind of 3 or 4 years, but I want them to do a little bit more than what we're currently seeing in these tools. And I really want us, and this goes back to what John was saying earlier, I want us to have control to decide and define how they are. But at the same level, I don't want us to have to turn into pseudo programmers and be using tools like if this then that, because that's projecting into a level that's too much challenge. So we have to find this happy medium of scrutable control, where people understand what's being done on their behalf to the extent to which they need to understand it in order to control it. So I do think these proactive agents will come relatively soon.
Okay, so scrutable control. And John, the research roadmap that we've kind of sketched out here, the vision from Vinny, and then the 3 interlocking research strands that we've discussed here now, to me, it seems like a robust, sustainable vision for the future for the 6 years of ADAPT 2, and of course into ADAPT phase 3 beyond that. But is it fixed, or is there an opportunity to kind of evolve that as we go forward?
Well, no, I think what we're setting out here is what I would characterize as a very exciting kind of foundations for a very flexible research ecosystem. So we're building a network of relationships between academics across institutions as a basis then for us to be able to engage with broader society, be that enterprise or society stakeholders or other groups. And the idea being that having those relationships in place already allows us to bring expertise together to respond to new challenges and questions as they arise. It's the questions that drive our science and our expertise forward, but often those questions come to us from our partners, from the stakeholders, from society, from enterprise. They ground our research. So we have we're building this flexible ecosystem where we want to be able to pivot and respond to questions and needs as they come up. Then there's different levels of that. So we can, for example, I've certainly worked, and I talked about it briefly already in the last few months, where enterprise partners have come to us with problems, you know, we've spoken with them, listened, and then co-created with them solutions to that challenge. And we've brought together people from different institutions to do that. So we've brought together expertise both at the, you know, the academic level, but also at the programmer level. It's something that just wouldn't be possible with an individual university. To bring together an expertise to create a solution. Now that's an example of flexibility. You know, that's the solutions we set out there aren't in the program as we are. So we can respond on an individual level, but also we can think about that if we get a critical mass in a particular area of interest from enterprise, you know, where we see a repeating pattern or a repeating problem that keeps cropping up, we can then put more structure around how we respond to that and put more solid base on that. We can develop spokes in different areas. You know, we'll talk later about how we looked at, you know, the health area or the fintech area. So we can more formalize that pivotal response. So absolutely, there's a lot of flexibility in what we do. What we're setting out here, I think, is an exciting basis for an ecosystem of research, but we are definitely proactively working to engage with people and to respond to the needs of stakeholders in society and enterprise.
Well, thanks, John. And that's a nice wrap up and a segue actually into the next session, which really speaks to some of those collaborations with industry around particular topics. So thank you to Aphra, to Dave, to John, and to Owen for that session. I'm now handing over to Dr. Jennifer Edmund. She is Associate Professor in Digital Humanities in Trinity College in Dublin. She'll host this next session where we get an opportunity to hear about some of our industry-focused research collaboration. Over to you, Jennifer.
That's great. Thanks so much, Declan. One of the things I find most exciting about ADAPT, and something which I think is being even more enhanced in ADAPT 2, is the way in which multidisciplinary researchers are brought together. So my own background actually is in German language and literature. Now that may seem very far from artificial intelligence, but in fact, I found that over the years, this training in culture and language and social norms has actually really given me an interest in actually how technology mediates that. And I found that the ADAPT Center is a really great place to do research like that, where we can really look into the kinds of new modes of innovation towards humane computing. I think this is what the ADAPT CEO, Vinny Wade, said at the top of the event, is about the developing a balanced society. And I think that's something we can all really get behind. My own work, again, looking at these cultural and social and the kind of the what might be seen as the softer side of some of this technological stuff, but which we all know is very hard, has me looking at things like human capital in the digital transformation. Every organization, every individual experiences these kinds of movements in their lives and in their organizations, but how can we better ease that change? And one of the really exciting programs that the ADAPT Center has undertaken with the institute where my center, the Center for Digital Humanities, sits, is called Human Plus, where we're looking to really recruit some of the next generation of leaders in thought and in practice in these areas. But on this topic of multidisciplinarity, I think culture is one place where ADAPT excels, but there are, of course, others. And we've got three excellent speakers here to tell you a little bit about some of these areas. And so I'd like to hand the floor over now to Professor Lucy Hederman, who is a lecturer in Trinity in the School of Computer Science and Statistics, and she's also a funded investigator with ADAPT. Her research interests are in the area of clinical decision support systems, patient-generated healthcare data, clinical research data infrastructure, and those kinds of areas. And she'll be speaking a little bit today about ADAPT's research on health data, interoperability, and governance. So Lucy, please take it away.
Thank you, Jennifer. I assume you can hear me.
Yep.
So good afternoon. I'm Lucy Hederman, a collaborator in the ADAPT Center and a lecturer in computer science in Trinity. And I've been lecturing and researching in health informatics for most of my career. And I'm currently leading the heterogeneity and interoperability challenge, which is part of the transparent digital governance strand of ADAPT 2. And this challenge is very much focused, in fact, on interoperability of health data and of metadata about health data, which I guess is how I came to be leading it. So healthcare is a data-intensive domain with escalating quantities of increasingly complex data, In addition to clinical data that we would have had in a traditional hospital chart, modern healthcare has access to novel biomarkers, omic data, sensor data, patient app data. If you apply machine learning techniques to all of this data, and you have a powerful engine for research, clinical research, innovation and improvement. But this research and innovation depends on the availability of relevant, high quality, meaningful data. ADAPT is combining cutting edge data science and semantic technologies to support data integration, data analytics and machine learning for applied clinical research. And ADAPT researchers are developing the next wave of methods and standards to support transparent, context aware, quality controlled and policy compliant integration of varied data to support the discovery of clinical insights for data-driven precision medicine and the analysis and discovery of novel and digital biomarkers of disease progression. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of these projects and the challenges within them that ADAPT is addressing. Precise 4Q, which has health insurance and medical software industry partners in it, amongst others, is an EU project which aims to bring predictive modelling to the prevention, treatment and rehabilitation of stroke. Our ADAPT colleagues in TU Dublin, led by John Kelleher, whom you've seen, are involved in the technology layer, the blue layer here, the fancy advanced machine learning stuff. They're developing predictive models. But I want to draw your attention to the fact that they admit that all the grunt work in this project, all the effort is on the data integration of multidisciplinary data from multiple clinics across multiple jurisdictions. And this is a theme we'll see again. Real clinical data is messy. Different clinics collect different data in different ways, despite standards, and more so, of course, across national boundaries. In the panel discussion, Dave Lewis mentioned a project, he didn't name it, which is investigating the environmental triggers of autoimmune disease, a specific autoimmune disease called vasculitis. This project called Revert is led by consultant nephrologist and ADAPT researcher, Professor Mark Little. And the project integrates temporospatial environment data, so pollution and weather particularly, with clinical and patient-generated data from the Patient Empower app, which we've worked with them to generate. And it makes it available to our statisticians, Arthur White and Jason Wise, to search for patterns and to build prediction models for ultimate clinical use. So bringing the insights back to the treatment of the patient. The key challenges in this project are semantic data integration, again, data governance, and the need for novel statistical techniques. For rare diseases such as vasculitis or motor neuron disease, about which I'll say more in a moment, there isn't enough data in Ireland to draw conclusions and model predictions. So we're working on international efforts to make collected data available. In some cases, we're actually centralizing multinational data. In others, such as the one represented here, the EU-funded FairVasc project, which deals again with vasculitis, we're adopting a federated approach to allowing researchers to access vasculitis registry data across Europe. Vifor is a renal pharma company that's involved in this project and a big funder of this project. And so data will stay at the remote sites, and a subset of registry data will be extracted to local FairVasc versions of the registry represented in the red clouds here. But these have to be in semantically harmonized form so that we can issue queries across them. These queries will be co-designed by project partners and issued against these local triple stores. And the queries will only return aggregated data. They won't provide access to any individual record for data protection reasons. And the key challenges in FairVasc and similar projects are, again, data interoperability and data governance. Achieving interoperability involves consideration of every data item of interest in each registry and trying to agree what the canonical representation should be using standards where available. And then designing mappings from each item to that agreed version. And Declan O'Sullivan, whom I think you'll meet later, is the expert here in this project. FairVasc and any project involving individuals' health data, of course, has to do with significant data governance issues. ADAPT is exploring techniques to understand, model and automate data governance, data quality, data provenance, representing where information has come from so that we can track back and make sure it's reliable, for example. And we're using semantic web technologies to do this. Ray Walsh will speak shortly about ADAPT's collaboration with industry around these topics, data governance topics. Mark Little in ADAPT, who's the vasculitis expert, is leading the EU-funded Helical innovative training network, which is training 15 PhD students across Europe. Again, the focus is vasculitis, but the science is generalizable across immune diseases and beyond. Industry partners, mostly bioinformatics companies, provide technology and industrial placements and funding. I've listed some of those partners here. ADAPT is collaborating with Professor Hederman, a consultant neurologist at Beaumont, an international expert on motor neuron disease. The overall goal of this collaboration is to generate a sustainable precision medicine-based solution for heterogeneous and rare neurodegenerative diseases, motor neuron disease being the classic. Drugs to treat these diseases need to be targeted at specific cohorts of patients based on genomic and other novel biomarkers. As we've been doing in the FAIRVASC project, ADAPT will be integrating pan-European, multi-source, multi-format, multimodal and longitudinal data using semantic web technologies to address heterogeneity and data governance. ADAPT machine learning experts, led by John Kelleher, whom you've met, and Rob Ross, will be developing semi-automated cohortization of patients to identify subgroups with minimum variance for given selection criteria. Studying these cohorts should result in insights on how to provide more precise treatments, which is of obvious interest to the pharma companies, those involved here and others. And the research will also give clinical research organizations such as IQVIA a quick and efficient analysis of the pan-European data set, enabling targeted selection of patients for constructing clinical trials. Separately but related, the HSC, icon bottom left, are launching a shared living lab focused on the use of digital in multiple sclerosis, another neurological condition. Another line of health data research in ADAPT concerns patient-generated health data, which is of interest to patient app companies, such as our partner Patient Empower, as well as to wearables and telemedicine companies. Damon Berry and Dimfan O'Sullivan in TU Dublin and I are looking at how to integrate this data into clinical decision-making and into the EHR. Again, interoperability is a key issue, whereas traditional health data has been standardized, patient-generated health data hasn't. One of our PhD students is looking at what might help clinicians to trust patient-generated health data for clinical decision-making, and data quality, data provenance, data governance are all important aspects which ADAPT is well placed to address. ADAPT is involved in other health-related initiatives, about which I won't say very much, but we have a Centre for Eintegrated Care. Davra is a partner in this project, an IoT platform company, and we've been involved in intelligent search projects in the health space, pharmacovigilance and COVID. And I'm going to wrap up with a slide showing the mugshots of the people who are involved in the health research within ADAPT here. This is a growing number of people, but this is the current set of those people. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for those remarks, Lucy. It's really, I think it's a great example of both how the ADAPT Centre is really a partner of choice in so many of these key areas, but also how the work that we do can make such a difference to society, both for people who are perhaps suffering from a rare disease, or maybe those who are suffering from a less rare disease. So I think that this same kind of sense of the impact that the ADAPT Centre's work can have for industry, for society, for research will be covered as well in the next presenter's comments. Professor Ray Walsh is a lecturer in the Faculty of Engineering and Computing in Dublin City University. He is one of Ireland's foremost experts in AI standards and data science. His career has spanned policy, industry, skills and education, and he's chair of a number of emerging technology working groups internationally. So he's going to tell us a little bit today about data spaces, and data government. Please, Ray.
Yes, thanks very much. Hopefully everybody can see me and see my slides. So my name is, and thanks very much for the kind introduction. My name is Ray Walsh. I'm a senior academic researcher with ADAPT on data governance and standards for emerging technologies. And I'm also a director of the EU Observatory for ICT Standards. And previously I've worked in industry with Ericsson's and Siemens. And that's before I came over to the dark side. So in relation to data governance and privacy and trust, we start off with our, looking at how we, as Dave Lewis put it, we're shoulder to shoulder with industry. We have providing an essential pivot point where GDPR is centered in Ireland. And data governance is really for everyone. It's for the citizen and for industry. And we are driving RTDI projects in collaboration with our industry partners in what's increasingly becoming a fast evolving landscape of data and AI standardization and EU Data Governance Act, with security breaches and hackers, as you can see with the recent scenario with the HSC. Privacy is a right, but data sharing is the future. And we in ADAPT then are global leaders in relation to data interoperability, data governance, driving data and AI strategies. And these data and AI strategies and policies are not just for Ireland, but also for Europe and the rest of the world. We have Declan, whose expertise is on data interoperability, and Dave with AI trustworthiness, and Marcus on business innovation services, and Aphra, governance and impact of media and technology, and Rob on data governance and future of privacy. So ADAPT researchers and industry partners are striking a balance then between privacy on one hand and then utility or agency, as Owen called it in the previous talks, which is the need to, first of all, to keep our data safe, but also then on the need to share our data. In the ADAPT Research Centre, we're working at national, European and international level to shape the governance of data for governments, for industry partners like yourselves, and for customers and for the consumer. We provide policy and strategy leadership by working with the European Commission on public-private partnership projects, where you have large consortia with industry partners. And that's right across the horizontal technologies like big data and 5G, cloud and edge computing, IoT, digital twin, cybersecurity, DLT, blockchain. And we're helping industry to adapt to this changing landscape, to this changing data landscape, to secure and protect data, your data, and your brands. And you can see how brands can be damaged, like what happened to the HSC. Creating smart and automatic tools using artificial intelligence and natural language processing technology to help industry to scale their data governance needs and to comply with this landscape, this evolving landscape of standardization and regulation. So our data ecosystem then, which we bring to our partners, involves collaboration, obviously, but collaboration across a huge number of technologies, cloud and big data, like the major horizontal technologies, 5G and IoT. And in, as I said, consortia and companies who are interested in new insights and new products, new tools and new services, which use and consume data or provide data sharing platforms. We provide research on federated data spaces, privacy, trust, ethical issues that need to be addressed by industry providers in their data governance strategies. And ADAPT has a fantastic record with EU partnership projects like Human Plus and Protect and Stand ICT, Elite S, Teaming AI, Warifit, to name but a few of them. And our industry partners include brand names that are known right throughout the world, like HP and Microsoft and Siemens, Nokia, Accenture, IBM. And here's three like OpenNet and Decawave and Theoglass, who we all know, indigenous. And these are leaders in ICT technology and standards globally, so not just within Ireland. And plus we have many other startups who collaborate on a regular basis, and they're engaged with us through our networks of accelerators and incubators. We have regular dialogue with government departments and agencies. The Office of Taoiseach, the Office of the Government Chief Information Officer, the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, obviously because we're dealing with data governance and standardization, the National Standards Authority of Ireland, but DEPR and DETI and Foreign Affairs and Finance, all of our part of our collaboration work for data governance and standardization. We shape European international ICT policies and strategy. We do that by working collectively and collaboratively with the European Commission, with OECD, with the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, NATO, and IEEE. Your data and your customer data are priceless. Managing that data securely, transparently, compliantly is central to ADAPT's core business and our industry partnerships. In the context of evolving AI and data standards and regulations, we keep our partners up to date with the latest policies and the latest strategies in the larger data ecosystem. And the privacy enhancing technologies being developed for our partners will create tools and applications to facilitate compliance by design. We in ADAPT put privacy and trust at the center of data governance. Our international and European networks will be a great benefit to our industry partners, and we're ideally placed to facilitate connections across Europe through this vast network. But more importantly, to draw on our experience from these connections to bring real and impactful added value to our partners. Initiatives like EU Hubs for Data and GAIA-X and International Data Space Association. These projects and associations are working on the future needs of data share, the future needs of data spaces, and future strategies for data governance. Informatica and OSI and other examples here are partnerships that are core to, again, us providing this collaborative environment. Informatica's collaboration is on AI recommender systems for data regulatory compliance. And this is a common theme in many of our other cross-sectoral projects, including some of the social media platforms that we were working with. Where meeting the compliance requirements under international regulations is becoming increasingly complex. ADAPT researchers look to AI methods to develop recommender systems for document annotation to help meet this compliance under various international regulations such as GDPR. With OSI, we created an advanced linked data platform for geospatial data using standardized web technologies. And many other projects where we will co-create secure, trustworthy, private and transparent solutions will meet governance needs of data providers and data consumers. In fact, Lucy Hederman referred to the FAIRVAST project, which is on integration and federation of clinical registry data. And I highlighted some of the data interoperability and data governance research with industry. And I'm minded of the phrase of thinking global and acting locally, which was about saving the planet. But we actually try and adapt to think global and act global, to create ICT landscape of the new digital single market and preserve and protect European values, to co-create digital governance policy and strategies for the next generation of data entrepreneurs. And these can be based in Ireland or anywhere in the world. So to wrap up, irrespective of whether your data type is user or sensor, customer or corporate, cloud or big data, IoT or digital twin, we want to help ADAPT being the expertise and the vision to meet your company's data governance needs. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ray. I think you really said it at the beginning of your remarks. You know, data governance is for everyone. And while there are regulatory sides and there are questions around how to act responsibly in terms of privacy and trust as a company within this space, there's also the possibility of getting a lot of support for this from ADAPT. So to bring this all to a close before we go to a few questions, we come to our third speaker in this section, Dr. Robert Ross. He's a senior lecturer at the TU Dublin, the Technological University in Dublin, where he teaches master's level courses in deep learning and leads the Applied Intelligence Research Center. His primary research is in situated intelligence systems and their applications across domains from elder care through to financial technology, which is what he'll be talking about today. Within ADAPT, Robert is industry lead for digitally enhanced engagement strand, and he'll be talking a little bit about fintech today. So Robert, I'll pass over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and many thanks for the introduction, Jennifer. As most of you are already aware, financial technology, or fintech, is changing the way large segments of banking, insurance, and investment sectors work. But we are also beginning to see how this impact is filtering through into people's daily lives, either in terms of their daily financial transactions, but also in terms of the transparency of the relationship between the customers and clients and the financial institutions which serve them. On that note, today I would like to briefly highlight what we here in ADAPT see as the key drivers in fintech over the next period, and give you an overview of where our own fintech ambitions are and how we hope to work with others to drive technology innovation, but also transparency in financial services and applications. So in terms of the drivers of growth, the big consistent four over the past 10 years have, of course, been first, increasing return in investment, second, cutting costs, third, adherence to regulatory requirements, and fourth, and related to that, improving risk management within an organization. More recently, the range of drivers has, of course, though, become more diverse. The obvious one for us here living in Ireland is the continued impact of Brexit, not only in terms of the financial services sector and how it's being redistributed across Europe, but also the range of technological solutions that are now required to streamline various commercial transactions. In the past year, we have also had the repercussions of the pandemic. COVID-19 has not just seen an increase in working from home, but it also significantly sped up a movement towards a cashless economy where people have advanced in droves to online services for many of the activities that would otherwise have been conducted in bricks and mortar operations. But with these great growth vectors come additional challenges. And this is reflected in the policy changes that are already here and are coming down the tracks. Our politicians remind us that we need fintech and the financial sector in general to embrace sustainability as much as any other sector of the economy needs to. We also need to consider the social impact of technology and try to ensure that fintech and retail fintech in particular helps to increase financial literacy and digital inclusion, and that we don't end up in a situation where a digital underclass is excluded from financial services. This also relates, of course, to the challenge of explainability, where we need to be able to substantiate financial management and risk decisions across a wide range of applications. Also, particularly in the last few months, of course, we have seen the very real dangers that fraud, hacking, and security breaches can bring. Online identity verification and the integration of trusted agents, both within the firewall of an organization and outside, are all necessary. The EU's proposed DORA legislation on digital operational resilience for the financial sector is, of course, one very real manifestation of this. Finally, it is, of course, worth noting that a sector that fintech needs to respond to is the potential disruption of digital currencies. Whether these turn out to be the tulips of the 21st century or a long-term shift, they do represent a disruptive impact in the medium term. Across all of these opportunities, we believe that Ireland can be a global leader and help to drive the research and technological future and provide balance between excellent technology development and alignment with social needs. So, which brings me to ADAPT's fintech goals. Our goal is simply to bring excellent science in financial technology and ADAPT's core competencies in digital content in order to help speed up the adoption and positive impact of fintech in the real world. To date, we have focused on sub-disciplines, including RegTech, InsurTech, and PayTech. But fintech is, of course, very broad, and we see growth opportunities across LendTech and WealthTech as well. But regardless of the specific fintech branch, our competencies in digital content analysis and modeling can underpin development. We've already spoken today in general terms about our expertise in machine learning, domain modeling, governance, but our expertise is also much broader and deeper than that. To take a few additional examples. Conversational systems are growing rapidly in the fintech space, not only in terms of providing the low-hanging fruit of customer service agents, but also delivering collaborative assistance that can advise and work with stakeholders to both minimize risk and create a convenient mechanism for simplifying complex financial transactions. Behavioral and process modeling are equally important goals across fintech and related sectors. Here we aim to model processes and and typical operational flows and conduct analysis to optimize these flows or examine the consequences of changes that we might make. In terms of another example, consider personalization. Personalization is not just something that applies to movie recommenders. Automatic personalization allows new interfaces, applications, and services to be tailored to the needs of the user, hence increasing satisfaction. And as we know, that then leads to longer term engagement. So fintech is an important brand and focus area for us in Adapt2, with a strong pipeline of industry partners, and these partners are both national and international. Project areas that we have worked on or are working on presently include risk modeling, price elasticity, portfolio management, insurance claim assessment, to name but a few. To expand on this, let me briefly talk through a couple of example projects that we have worked on. An early project with Deutsche Bank developed and deployed machine learning driven solutions to help generate new insight reports on trends in technology. This work was deployed internally, providing a 3-to-1 return on investment. We have also run a number of projects with Fidelity Investments. One such project has looked at dividend modeling with a view to enhancing regulatory compliance. Meanwhile, with Munich Re, we have put our expertise in advanced machine learning and natural language processing to work in order to automate aspects of the underwriting process. But our projects, of course, can be diverse in nature. So for example, for another multinational fintech software firm, we assisted them with developing new analytics models to analyze absenteeism in the workspace. So the breadth of projects that we are involved with in the fintech space reflects the breadth of expertise that Adapt can draw on. Our team of senior academic researchers in this area span 4 different universities and multiple disciplines, ranging from artificial intelligence through to finance, governance, and the broader ICT space. As we move into the new phase of Adapt, we are excited by the opportunities and challenges presented by fintech and are very keen to work with high caliber partners in this area. In a moment, my colleague Declan Kibben will briefly review mechanisms for collaboration and how these sorts of relationships can be built up. But for the moment, I would just like to thank you for your attention and leave you with this quote from one of our partners. Many thanks.
It's a great presentation. In particular, it's a wonderful example of the way in which Adapt is able to bring together these technological areas, personalization, NLP, which may seem, as research areas are quite advanced and quite specific to themselves, but how they can actually be applied in real industrial contexts. So I think it's been a really interesting and very complimentary set of presentations. Thank you all to the speakers. I'm going to turn over now to my colleague Declan Kibben, who's going to talk a little bit, as was mentioned, about industry, and then we'll go into the question section.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. So I introduced myself earlier, Declan Kibben. As Executive Director in Adapt, I lead the team that drives the engagement with industry for collaborative research. And I want to thank Lucy, Ray, and Robert for your presentations earlier. I hope it gave you a good sense of some of the key collaboration areas that we're working on with industry. We are, of course, collaborating in other areas, other sectors, other domains, such as in language technologies, HCI, computer vision, animation, video processing, and so on. But we're seeing a ramp up in particular in health and data governance at the moment. From a data governance perspective, I think it's clear that in Adapt, we understand the data governance challenges that organizations are facing as they embrace and scale their AI-driven content technologies. We're working with our partners to co-create the policies and technology processes which will prioritize solutions that best balance, on the one hand, the needs of commercial innovation, and on the other hand, societal trust building. Ray Walsh showed us how Adapt researchers are world leaders in the data governance space. And it isn't just that we have our finger on the pulse. We are, in reality, the beating heart of this research activity in Ireland. We have strong international reach, and we've got positive collaborations across the EU. So if you'd like to know more, if you want to get involved, or just to meet some of the researchers, please do get in touch. In health, a common trend here, unsurprisingly, is that it's all about the data. Lucy Hederman described ADAPT's health-focused research using semantic web technologies, information science and knowledge engineering research to analyze, model and understand patient data and health data to make healthcare and patient data interoperable while complying to the obligations for privacy and data governance and the management of patient data. So this then enables machine learning and data analytics, which is then driving healthcare research, personalized and precision medicine and healthcare innovation. And the key to this is multidisciplinary collaboration and collaboration with industry. So in ADAPT's digital health research team, which as you'll have seen from Lucy's presentation, is numbering more than 20 research leaders. These are experts in clinical research and practice, in health informatics, in data science and in social science, and indeed in robotics. As you've just heard there, Robert Ross described ADAPT's fintech's collaborative research, how ADAPT's expertise in machine learning and knowledge graphs and NLP and conversational AI is being deployed to address challenges within our financial services and insurance industry partners with real impact. So whether it's automation, compliance, quality, optimization, or keeping pace with new technology are just some of the reasons that industry are coming to ADAPT. We will have the opportunity for some questions just shortly before we wrap up, but I wanted to spend a few minutes on how we engage with industry and ADAPT and the supports for that engagement. Our mission is to advance pioneering multidisciplinary research in AI-driven digital content technologies in collaboration with industry, and to co-create groundbreaking capabilities within those partner companies that drive economic growth and societal impact. And core to working up to a successful engagement is, of course, to identify the alignment between the research interest and expertise of the ADAPT researchers, and then on the other sides, the needs and objectives of our industry partners. And we achieve this, this alignment by having professionals who have come from industry, so they understand industry. And it's these teams, the business management team and our design and innovation lab, our D lab, that make it easy for you to access and connect with ADAPT's large scale and multidisciplinary research pool, to understand your objectives and to engage the right team of research experts and to structure and deliver projects professionally. So within the team, we have dedicated business development managers, Edmund O'Connor, Kieran Flynn and Connor McNally. And their contact details are provided here. It's not by accident, and don't be shy, get in touch with them. We are here to make these connections, to support collaboration between our researchers and you, so please do reach out. So you heard today that ADAPT's research strength lies in the breadth and excellence of our expertise that spans thought leaders in computer science and many other disciplines across our 8 partner universities. So this gives us the capability and the culture for excellent interdisciplinary collaboration focused on human-centric AI. It's important to emphasize this. You know, ADAPT provides access to these experts, drawing in the required expertise in AI for content and media analytics across all modes, language, speech, HCI, machine learning, and many others. And key additional collaborating disciplines coming from clinical research, from healthcare, from psychology, from business law, sociology. We provide a route to collaboration with academia that is structured, professional, and scalable. For example, we have a single framework collaboration agreement rather than multiple bilateral collaboration agreements with individual researchers. So that's a really practical solution for industry. We've got the capacity through our D lab for quick wins, for proof of concept systems and for prototypes, which help with the evaluation of our research. At the same time, we have the breadth and the depth of research expertise for longer term projects, larger scale, more ambitious, addressing bigger challenges, bigger research questions. And we offer a range of collaboration options, including targeted and collaborative projects, postdoctoral researcher collaboration and placements, PhD studentships, and access to EU funding consortiums. We have flexible funding models, and these are aligned. I'm not going to go into the details here, but they're very much aligned to the industry partners' preferences around IP access, IP ownership, and access to results. And the commercial team and the IP manager are here to support you in this. So just as I close this slide, I want to say collaboration with industry is really important to ADAPT because it's good for research. It provides real-world problems and use cases and opportunities to access or generate new data sets for research. So before we move into the QA and wrap up, I just want to summarize by saying the purpose of today's session is to share with you our research vision, to demonstrate how we've scaled and expanded our research capability and capacity from phase 1 into phase 2, to learn about some of the active collaborations that we have with industry, in health, in data governance, in fintech, and to extend an invitation to each of you to join us to co-create the industry research roadmap for ADAPT in phase 2. With that in mind, we'll be following up with you in the coming weeks and months to understand your objectives and explore this alignment between your needs and ADAPT's research focus and expertise. We'll be offering facilitated one-to-one discovery workshops and sessions with the right team of ADAPT professors and other researchers, with DLab and the business development team. The research partnership is the really important part here for ADAPT, the quality of the research and the continuity of the engagement. The approach works for SMEs as well as large multinational companies, and we're interested in sustainable multi-year partnerships and joint labs with a portfolio of research collaborations, including, as I said earlier, short-term impactful innovation projects, right through to longer-term targeted projects, PhD studentships, and postdoctoral fellowships. So I'll leave it at that. So I want to thank you for your attention over the last almost hour and a half. In the few minutes that we have remaining, we have a number of questions. So let me stop my video. Or stop my share, I should say. Okay. Okay, so first up, we have a question from Sven in VMware, and it's about bias in AI and in agents and algorithms, and maybe sharing with us some of the research from ADAPT in that area, because I know we did a project last year with a large global multinational ICT company around bias in language models. So John, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So bias, a really important question at the moment, and I think one of the places I'd start with in discussing that is the type of bias we're dealing with. So is it a bias against an individual or a group, for example? It's important to think about those and how the AI system affects that. And I think when you think about that difference between a group and an individual, it reflects why the structure we have of a strand dealing with algorithms, a strand dealing with the user model, where you might be modeling an individual, or a strand dealing with enterprise and society and the impacts of AI. That triumvirate of concerns really positions us well to deal with bias across those different levels, because we're able to look at an algorithm, how it affects an individual, an algorithm, how it affects a society or an ecosystem, you know. And the bias is a question that we'll need to go up and down through those levels to think about. Now, at a fundamental level, from an algorithmic perspective, we often focus in on bias in terms of the bias in the data or the bias in the algorithm. And we have work ongoing in that. So Declan spoke already, or highlighted the fact where we look, and we have ongoing work, for example, with industry partners, looking at, in the context of machine translation and language models, gender bias, for example, and how that's encoded in language or unencoded in the language generated by a system and reducing that. But we also have work dealing with bias that focuses in on explainable AI and understanding these complex models and explaining how they made those decisions, which is an important way of understanding and revealing what biases the system has in terms of what features it's attending to. So we have those ongoing. I think one of the other areas, though, that I'm very excited about is if you think about modern AI data-driven systems, distinctive aspects of those systems, and some of this will pick up on what Lucy spoke about earlier in the health space, where we have federated learning. If you think about where you have a federated data system, and at the same time you might have continuous integration, continuous deployment systems. So you're constantly rebuilding on new data sets that are generated in a real-time fashion. And each time you rebuild the model, that might integrate or introduce different bias aspects to the model. And that's why we have the idea that we think about data governance and model governance through the systems. And that's where we're able to integrate, for example, work between the different strands on enterprise and society and governance, what Dave Lewis and Ray was talking about earlier, with the work on algorithms, being able to go through those levels and thinking about okay, in a continuous integration, continuous deployment, who governs the models, who governs their usage is a really important aspect. And with the federated learning component, the idea that you can have bias introduced, for example, if you have a range of different locations that the data is sourced from, how does that affect your bias? And on another aspect I'm very interested in, where we're thinking about reducing model size. You know, you can, for environmental reasons, you might want the smaller model, or for deployment reasons, you might want the smaller model. Well, what's the trade-off? You know, if you make your model a bit smaller and you reduce the accuracy of the model by a small amount, does that reduction in accuracy, it might seem okay, but it may be not okay if that reduction in accuracy affects one subpopulation more than another. And finally, another area that I think we do an excellent job of thinking about as well is beyond the development of the algorithm and the governance, it's how the deployment of an algorithm into an ecosystem affects people in different ways. Because, you know, if you deploy an algorithm, it's not necessarily the case that everybody is processed by that algorithm, you know. And for example, in a healthcare domain, you know, do all patients get treated bias, or do some people who maybe have more money behind them, do they get a doctor to deal with them, you know, and other people with from a different background get processed by an algorithm. So beyond bias, there's ethics and fairness. And I think that those different layers that we have, those three different layers of, you know, the algorithm, the user, the society and enterprise, and that expertise we have across those layers puts us in a great position to handle a range of questions in that space.
Great, well, thanks, John. I was going to say a simple yes, no would have done, but that's a very comprehensive response. Thank you for that. Look, we have a bunch of other questions there, but we're kind of out of time. So what we're going to do is we'll address those questions in the one-to-ones, the follow-ups with industry afterwards. But for now, I just want to say thank you to all of the speakers here today, and to hand over to our CEO, Vinny Wade, for some final remarks.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Declan, and thanks mainly to the audience for the questions that we've seen through the chat, and the ones which have come in through email to us. As we said, today is just the first day of the next 6 years. What we're really looking forward to doing is connecting to industry now and being able to, as Declan said it, co-create the future with our industry partners to be able to really tackle the challenges that we face in an AI-driven but a human-centric world. And that's it. That few words. I'd like to thank all the presenters today from Adaptive and from all of those people in the background who have actually made this session work so well in terms of technologies, in terms of getting our ideas across. But I suppose the real work starts now. The real work is in the follow-up. The real work is in being able to work with yourselves, the industry partners, to really try and identify which of the challenges you want real focus on, that we can make breakthroughs together, and that we can actually co-create the future in this exciting time. So last point, thank you very much for your attendance. Thanks very much for all the engagements, and we'll be following up with you on one-on-ones after this. Thank you very much indeed.